And then, okay, I see that Naima started to record. And then if you have any technical issue, we have Naima with us. Naima, I don't know if you want to say hi. And actually, Naima is going to explain you quickly something important about the visualization mode, because now you can see, I mean, depending on what you chose, you have different options between gallery and so on. And Naima would like to explain you what's the best option.
Thank you, Chantal. So very quickly, to better enjoy the webinar, we recommend to click on the top right bottom of your Zoom screen. You have a button that is called View, and I will recommend to put the speaker view. So like that, you will see the person that is actually presenting instead of everyone. So it's a little bit less messy. So enjoy.
Thanks, Naima. Is it clear for everyone? I mean, the most important is that you see the slides and you hear the voice, so that's true, but it's always a bit of a comfort also to be able to see the person speaking. So thanks, Naima, for this. We have great experts with us today. You may know them already. There are Anne-Sophie Pellier from BirdLife International, Jesus Pinilla from CO BirdLife. We have also Vanya Satsu from METSI, and we have Selma Benzikri from Vertigo Lab. So I will introduce more in detail these four wonderful people later, but for now, I would like to welcome Raphaël Billet from the Tour du Vala, who kindly accepted to tell a few words to open the webinar. So Raphaël, while you're joining, I will quickly introduce you. Raphaël joined the Tour du Vala in March 2021 as program director. The Tour du Vala, for those who don't know it, is the research center for wetlands in the Mediterranean, I would say. So Raphaël has some 20 years of experience on different topics, but among others, and the most relevant for us today are that he has experience on coastal zone management, on the implementation of innovative financing mechanisms, as well as adapting to climate change. An important thing also to know about Raphaël is that he recently led the Rescue Project. That was a large-scale project to support the implementation of nature-based solutions for adapting to climate change in the Pacific Islands. So Raphaël, welcome. The floor is yours. I think you have a presentation, so we might need Anne-Sophie to stop sharing the screen and Raphaël to share yours.
Yes, thank you, Chantal. And good afternoon, everyone. There you go. Does it work?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. What I will try to do is really just to give a brief introduction on some issues regarding the economics of NBS. So it's not a lecture about the economics of NBS, and you have plenty other presentations to reflect on. I just wanted to give a couple of examples and raise a few questions that I think will be relevant for today and also probably for the next few webinars. As you said, Chantal, Tour du Vala is a research institute for the conservation of Mediterranean wetlands. And just in two words, what I want to stress is that we have a quite narrow focus, which is the wetlands in the Mediterranean, but we like to think that we do everything about them. So we do scientific research, we do management also. We have 3,000 hectares of estate in the Camargue. We do a lot of about conveying the results of what we do and then transferring that knowledge, and also some advocacy, meaning that we are trying to convince decision makers of the importance to protect Mediterranean wetlands. We have 5 themes of activities: species conservation, eco-health, or One Health if you prefer, ecosystem management and restoration, wetlands, wetland dynamics and water management. And we have also a number of science-society interfaces mechanisms. We work at 3 scales: the Mediterranean Basin, the Camargue Delta, and the estate, as I said, which is about 3,000 hectares. So that was for Tour du Val, and of course, we are happy to answer any question. I'm saying we because I have some colleagues with me on this webinar today. Just to warm up, you're probably all familiar with nature-based solutions now. It's been quite a big topic internationally in the last few years, especially since not the last one, but the previous IUCN Congress in Hawaii in 2016. So just to warm up and make sure we start from the same page, nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural and modified ecosystems in ways that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively to provide both human well-being and biodiversity benefits. It's important also to keep in mind that we're talking about nature-based solutions, and these are solutions to specific issues, of course. It's sometimes a weakness, I would say, of the of the concept or of the name of the concept is that we have the word solutions, but we don't necessarily know solutions to what. So IUCN has classified those in very useful clusters. So I won't read them, but you're already probably familiar. And what's important is that for an intervention to be considered an NBS, it must address one or multiple societal challenges in an integrated manner. And if the main challenge, if one of the challenges that is addressed by an NBS is biodiversity loss, then it has to address other issues as well, or other challenges to be considered an NBS, so that we just so that we're not confused between good old conservation activities and actual NBS. Now, why worry about the economics of NBS? I've put here a number of key references internationally. Most of them are already very well known. What's common to most of this literature is that there is a widespread promise about NBS that they be cost-effective, easy to maintain, and long-term solutions with multiple benefits. And quite often, I haven't made an extensive and systematic literature review, but my feeling reading such documentation is that very often you have a lot of declarations and assumptions about the fact that NBS are cost-effective and so on and so forth, rather than actual economic valuations and cost-benefit analysis. So you have a lot of general discussion about, yes, we're confident that nature-based solutions are cost-effective, but you don't have that many figures, I find. And of course, the question is, well, if nature-based solutions are cost-effective, easy to maintain, long-term solutions, efficient, with bringing multiple benefits, then why are they not already the first choice of any decision maker? Why are we struggling to actually mainstream these NBS, and why are gray solutions very often the first choice of decision makers? It's a multi-faceted question, but I think that at least one question that we should ask is whether it's an economics issue, whether there is an economic point to be made so that we convince decision makers that NBS are a very relevant choice in most contexts. And to do that, we have to wonder if economics, including cost-benefit analysis, can help and can actually make a difference concretely. We're all, of course, confident that any economist can come up with a CBA about pretty much anything, but the key issue really is whether these economic valuations, this cost-benefit analysis will be used by decision makers and will make a difference. Just want to start from an example on which we're working at Tour du Val. And really, everything I know about this has been taught to me by my colleagues, and especially Lisa and Lorena, who are attending the webinar. So if there are any questions about the technicalities, they'll be on board to respond. But just in a few words, I think it's an interesting example for our discussion today. It's an NBS project on the hydrological and ecological restoration of the area that's in green on your screen. And as you know, I'm not going into the details about Camargue, but what you have to keep in mind is that it's a very artificialized and polarized delta with very little natural water fluxes left. This part that was in green on the previous slide and that is in yellow here of about 6,500 hectares was sold by the private company who owned it. It was sold to the Coastal Conservancy, the French Coastal Conservancy, in several phases, starting from 2008. And it was not the Coastal Conservancy who actively tried to purchase it. It was really the company who wanted to get rid of this. Then when it was sold, the diagnosis by the Coastal Conservancy and many stakeholders around was that keeping the seashore where it was basically impossible. So of course, impossible means impossible not at any cost, but at reasonable costs. And also that there was an increased risk of submersion of this area because of sea level rise, essentially, and so that it would cost more and more in the future to protect this area against the sea, and that for that reason, no human settlement should be allowed to take place there. So the strategy was to implement adaptive management to sea level rise, so adaptation to sea level rise, by a planned and progressive retreat, which means that the seafront dikes, which are in green on the map, were abandoned, basically, and the focus was on consolidating and maintaining the inshore dike, which is in red on your screen. So the restoration has been active. Some works needed to be done. Restoration of hydraulic and biological connections, especially between the Vaccarès hydro system and the sea via the former salt works or salt pans, and the restoration of connections with the Rhone River via the Japan watershed. I'm not going into the details, but in a nutshell, the biodiversity response is very good, meaning that a lot of species enjoy this new and restored environment. So we see more birds, more fish, and so on and so forth. The socio-economic response is overall good as well. Some activities are developing in terms of ecotourism, for example. But what's important for the discussion today is that this project is subject to heated debates. It's not always well understood or accepted by some local stakeholders. There are very mixed feelings about it. So in that context, what is the role of economics, or what was the role of economics in such an NBS project? As I said, the decision process was quite simple, and that's why it's useful for a 15-minute discussion. It's just a private company who decides to sell salt pans because profits do not compensate maintenance costs of the seafront dike. So basically, business is becoming impossible. And the Coastal Conservancy is buying the area, mainly for biodiversity or nature conservation purposes. With a strong push by the Ministry of Environment in France, because from a pure economic rationality for the Coastal Conservancy, it was debatable whether it made sense to buy such a large area that risked disappearing in the next few decades. So when the Coastal Conservancy bought the area, there was, to simplify, a decision to be made between two options. The first option was to restore and maintain the seafront dike, okay, and the calculations that were made at that time showed that it would take an upfront investment of 20 to 41 million euros, maintenance costs of 800,000 euros per year, forever, basically, and probably even increasing, of course, as sea level rise and climate change go worse. And with poor biodiversity outcomes, because as long as you have this seafront dike, it means that there's no real connection between the delta and the sea, and so biodiversity is very hard to restore. The other option was to retreat, reconnect, and maintain the inshore dike, the one that was in red on the previous map. This requested an upfront investment of 1.5 million euros only for the salt pans, to restore the salt pans themselves, so compared to the 20 to 41 million in the first option, and a 7 to 30 million euros investment for the inshore dike, the red one, which is also actually necessary with the seafront dike, because it's not enough to really protect the whole area in case of very strong storms. The maintenance cost was also evaluated to be much less, 80 to 140,000 euros per year, and biodiversity gains were anticipated to be quite high. So it was admittedly very rough figures. There was no ecosystem services valuation for any of the two options, and there was no cost-benefit analysis as such. There was, the decision was made really just on very rough figures of what it could cost in both options. And so I would say that the decision for the Coastal Conservancy to go for an adaptive management approach and what we call a nature-based solution was quite obvious. It's a bit like in the case of the Catskills in close to New York. I don't know, you probably heard about that case in the US, where the local government had to choose between working on the watershed with farmers to get clean water or building a water treatment plant. And the calculation was so obvious that it was actually never made at the time of the decision. So the decision was obvious, but it led to heated debates, as I said, and these debates are not over. So I would say that actually the decision process itself is not completely over. I'm not sure, I cannot be sure that in 10 years from now, the way we manage the area with the Coastal Conservancy will still be the same. So based on this example, and just to start concluding my presentation, I want to raise a few questions to consider when addressing issues surrounding the economics of NBS. The first one is about how can cost-benefit analysis of NBS be done? So the methodology, the methods, and how, of course, how can they be done? But most importantly, how can they be robust enough? We have to come up with good, robust figures if they are to be used. And what are some key obstacles? And I'm sure you will discuss that in much more details during the 3 webinars, but there are many obstacles to CBAs. There is uncertainty with regard to long-term benefits with NBS, because you work with nature, you work with ecological processes. So there is, or you can assume that there are more uncertainties than in the case of a gray solution. At least it's not the same uncertainties, I should say. In some cases, you also have small numbers of beneficiaries or low value of ecosystem services to be valued, which also raises issues for your CBAs. Another issue is that the efficiency of gray or nature-based solutions is often difficult to compare because you don't design solutions to exactly the same problems, and they don't provide exactly the same services. So in most cases, it's not just about replacing a gray solution by a nature-based solution. It's actually a different set of solutions and a different future altogether that you're planning. So difficult to compare. There are very significant distributional issues that have to be considered. Who wins in the case of gray solutions implementation, who loses, and the same for nature-based. It's usually not the same stakeholders and has to be taken into account.
Do you have a lot to go?
How much time do I have?
You're already over time, but it's so interesting that I think it's good that you're setting the scene. So, but if you, in 1-2 minutes.
In 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. I'm sorry for that.
No worries.
So you have it here. First set of questions about how to do the cost-benefit analysis. Second set of questions about will they be used? As I said, these tools, these economic tools are useful only if they are used. It's quite obvious, but it's important to keep in mind. And I've just put this reference to a paper published in 2013 that we should always remember that there is a lot of evidence of economic valuations being produced and not being used. It doesn't mean that they are bound not to be used. It means that we have to be careful and that we have to design them with the use in mind. So in a demand-driven perspective rather than a supply-driven perspective, sorry. So they need to be fit for purpose, to be suited to decision processes. Timing is important. And, in the case of Camargue that I briefly explained, the fact that there was no and probably no need for a CBA originally doesn't mean that we wouldn't need to do it today, because as I said, the decision process seems to be over, but is it really over? Do we need to spend more energy convincing people, even once the decision seems to have been made already? And the third set of questions that I suggest is if they are used, are they going to be useful? Meaning, are they going to serve the purpose that we want them to serve? Can they make a difference? Under which conditions? And could they be counterproductive? When you do a cost-benefit analysis, you always have to consider the eventuality that the cost may exceed the benefits. And then what do you do with that? So thank you very much. Don't forget that for Christmas, you can adopt Flamingo and help Tour du Vala and our activities through that.
Thank you. It's a very nice thing, actually. I did it last year for my nephews and they still follow because you receive newsletters and it's really nice to see that you have your Flamingo and you follow. So it's a nice way to get people also in connection with the world of wetlands, I would say. Thanks a lot, Raphael, for opening. We're going to jump into our first session, but while Selma and Anne-Sophie are joining, I just would like to insist on the fact that today's webinar is an introduction. So it's actually, as Raphael was saying, part of a series that you will also be welcome to attend until next spring. And the next sessions will go much more into details. Another important thing that these webinars are not about is that we're not going to give you magic formula on how to implement NBS in terms of practices. I think the case of Camargue is a specific example, and in all your areas you would find different situations, especially having to talk with local stakeholders. But what is important is that you get into the mindset. There is clearly a shift. I think if this concept has been taking off in 2016, there is a reason. People are changing, organizations are changing, companies are changing, the world is changing. And there is a bigger connection now, more than ever, between the economy and nature. So it's really about getting into the concept and understanding how things are going to work. And last but not the least, this is not about restoration practices. So if this is what you're expecting, we just wouldn't like to disappoint you on this. This is not going to be about this. So hoping the points are clear for all, let's look quickly at the agenda. But I think you've had time while I was speaking to see that we're first going to enter in a bit of context. So understand what's the situation in the Mediterranean and how in this context we can highlight the benefits of NBS. And then we'll have a second part that goes into an overview of the methodology on both cost-benefit analysis and stakeholder engagement. And then we will listen to more cases from the ground, specifically in Sardinia and Spain. And our last part will be dedicated to discuss together and conclude. So as I said, you will be given the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. So we have that space dedicated, but feel free also while speakers are presenting to start writing your questions in the chat if you feel more comfortable with the chat. So let's start our first session. As I said, it's going to give you an overview on the Mediterranean context and help you understand the concepts of NBS, ecosystem services, and how they are both different, but very much interconnected at the same time. For this session, our presenters are Anne-Sophie Pellier and Selma Benzekri. Anne-Sophie is a conservation scientist with 10 years of experience in the science policy interface. She's been managing projects across Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Europe. Since 2018, she leads the work on ecosystem services for BirdLife and the development of a toolkit that some of you might have heard about, which is called TESSA, and is valuing ecosystem services for non-specialists especially. And Sophie strongly believes that sharing knowledge, tools, and methodologies is the best way to ensure that we restore, protect, and manage ecosystems, such as wetland, while generating socioeconomic opportunities. Selma, on the other hand, is a consultant in environmental economy. She has a background in agronomy, engineering, and environmental management. She holds a master's degree in public policies and environmental strategy. So that's an interesting combination for the topic we're going to talk about. Selma has also worked for the French Environment Ministry on environmental valuation of planning projects for the company that some of you know called Veolia. She was working on their environmental plan, and now she has joined Vertigo Lab to work on environmental public policies tools, environmental prospective, biodiversity conservation, ecosystem services, NBS, and topics connected to environmental economy. So ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chantal, and thank you very much, Raphael, as well. All very good points on the cost-benefit analysis, and we'll try to get to that into the discussion at the end of the webinar. So first of all, I wanted to also expose you a little bit the Mediterranean context. So you may all well be aware, sorry, I do have a bit of a problem. Okay. So you may all know that the wetlands in the Mediterranean basin cover 1.7 to 2.4% of the total surface of these 27 Mediterranean countries. And it's about 18.5 million hectares. So globally, it represents about 2% of the wetlands. And this is really something really important because in the Mediterranean region, they enable these regions to be a global biodiversity hotspot, and they are amongst the most productive ecosystems. So they can be lagoons, dunes, deltas, tidal marshes, etc. The problem nowadays that we have in the Mediterranean basin is that the maintenance of these key habitats for biodiversity, but also the multiple benefits they provide to people, such as flood alleviation, is still threatened by multiple pressures. And today, they are the world's most threatened ecosystems. And these wetlands were seen as lands that need to be drained, converted, and especially to be highly productive. And in the 20th century, this process really accelerated with the fast-growing population. And this really drove a runaway of coastal development and also an increase in natural resources use. So we lost 48% of those wetlands in the last 50 years, and 23% of them, of the remaining ones, were replaced in artificial wetlands. So it's due to several pressures. So we do have drainage, water abstractions, that is quite significant, coming from a conversion in agricultural, urban, and also industrial lands, but also the intensification and expansion of those lands. And we do have also other pressures such as pollution, overexploitation of resources such as overfishing that you can see on this figure, and disturbance. And this is, already a concern because we have the Med population, at least 1/3 of it, lives in those coastal zones. So the pressures are going to just intensify more and more. That said, this is of a high concern. And on the top of that, we do have climate change that comes to exacerbate the negative impacts on those wetlands. And the IPCC have done a report in 2019, and they forecast that 20 to 90% of existing coastal wetlands will be lost by 2100. So depending on different scenarios of climate change, such as sea level rise. So this forecasting results make sense since today wetlands are already disappearing 3 times faster than natural forests. And on the left hand side, you can see the map here. So one of our project partner, METSI, is working on coastal risks map, and they're forecasting the impacts due to climate change for coastal wetlands in the Mediterranean regions for 2100. So in the map, they did, for example, the coastal wetlands risk for Gare El Mela in Tunisia. And you can see that the blue zone indicates that the area would be under floods in 2100 due to sea level rise. And you can see that the lagoon of Gare El Mela, which is here, will completely disappear. The red line is the extent of the impact in the area that takes into account multiple climate drivers, such as sea level rise, storm surge, and precipitation. And you can see that the extent is quite significant by 2100. So of course, all of this has tremendous consequences, such as erosion, flooding. We have water abstraction that can lead to infiltration of salt in groundwater. That also leads to higher scarcity of drinking water and issues to irrigate crops, for instance. And we do have a loss of biodiversity that is really important nowadays. We have 36% of wetland dependent species are threatened by extinction in the Mediterranean. And there has been some regional and global assessments that predict that sea level rise alone in Europe will lead to 20 to 50% of the loss of the ecosystem of marshland, for instance, by the end of the century. So globally in the Mediterranean, we can really say that it's an ecological, economic, but also a social crisis. We wanted to show you this via some examples. So the first one is the lagoon of Sena Arubia in Sardinia that was hit by a big flooding event. And this was due to heavy rain precipitation that were coming from inland. And although there is no official reports yet from local authorities, the partners on the ground have gathered some information on production loss. And the costs were estimated to be over 1 million euros. So the lagoon water storage capacity probably reached its maximum and was unable to adapt to this event. The second example is in France, also events of flooding, and the estimating costs of it was estimated to be of 390 million euros. And these flooding events that happened in July 2021 was actually happening across Western and Central Europe. And the cost of these damages over this European region was over 10 billion euros. So when we imagine that the frequency of such natural disasters has doubled over the last 30 years, we can imagine that all of these damages could be avoided if we are able to actually protect, manage efficiently, or restore this kind of key ecosystems. We do have also Tour du Gala that has done a study in 5 Mediterranean watersheds in Algeria, France, Greece, and Spain. And the study estimated that the flood regulation capacity of such watersheds had decreased by 20% between 1987 and 2016, so in the last 30 years. So it is really an important thing to really protect this ecosystem and find solutions that will really help towards this their resilience. So the governments, to reduce this climate and disaster risk, they usually embark on building traditional engineering infrastructure such as levees, dams, or even dikes. And dikes were often first built to reclaim land from the sea, and I think participants here today may know that that's maybe the case in their region, and it's the case in many countries of the Mediterranean. But the issue with this infrastructure, they can interrupt wetland connectivity, they can disrupt aquatic habitats, they can reduce the functions of the wetlands in, for instance, removing pollutants or absorbing floodwaters, and they may actually increase losses when there are high events such as flooding. And without the hard infrastructures in place, sea level rise normally would lead to the wetlands moving inland. But in many places, these hard structures are actually preventing this natural adaptation of the ecosystem, which means that they are not only less suitable habitats for migratory birds, but we are also losing benefits of nature in those ecosystems. So with one example of the Tunis Gulf, scientists at the University of Carthage and the Research Institute for Development estimated that the retreat of the coastline in the Gulf was at the rate of over 20 meters per year. So sandy beaches may actually completely disappear in the near future. And that's a phenomenon that was due to dams that were built more inland to enable water resources and needs for people. But these dams trap sand and sediments, and which are not supplied enough to the coasts, neither to the beaches, and this ecosystem cannot maintain themselves in this case. And the Medjerda, which is the largest river in Tunisia, has not transported any sand to the coast of the Gulf for 20 years. And this has tremendous impacts because it led to erosion, but also accompanied by coastal flooding. And this is occurring along almost all the Mediterranean coast now. This has significant impact on the population, which, as we've seen, for the majority lives in coastal zones. And this retreat not only has infrastructure damages, but the sea that is being closer to the land means that there is a salinization of soil and water, and this is almost unavoidable now. But as Raphael kindly presented at the beginning of the webinar, now there are one solution that has really now strongly emerged, which is to work with enhanced nature to address all these societal challenges and to safeguard human well-being and biodiversity. So they are known as nature-based solution. I am not going to again provide you the definition. You can read it, and Raphael provided it to you at the beginning of this webinar. Just know that this concept of nature-based solution, some other concepts were already in place before, such as ecosystem-based approaches, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, society makes the industry, education, and urban and recreation sectors, and those sectors really govern natural resources. So nature-based solution could enable the how to change the unsustainable management that we have in natural areas now, and how to create productive but yet healthy ecosystems. So in the Mediterranean, the coastal wetlands could be made as a sustainable balance between economical growth, ecological preservation, but also ecosystem resilience. And I think nature-based solutions are really seen as a transformative transition now to a sustainable economy. And this should now be increasingly recognized by policy makers, and not just as a discussion, but really as action on the ground, as Raphael pointed out. Unfortunately, a nature-based solution has now entered the political agenda. And I think that's really at stake now we all know that the Aichi biodiversity targets were not completely achieved by 2020. And really now, it really urged the parties and other governments to implement the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, but that could be consistent and in harmony with the Convention of the CBD and other relevant international obligations that you can see here on the slide. The nature-based solution also support the Climate Pact at the COP26. And for the first time, nature and nature-based solution were key components of these negotiations. So, all we do must be nature-based and people-centered. That has been said. Nature-based solution can achieve more than a third of the greenhouse gas reductions needed by 2030 to meet the Paris climate targets. And what is quite interesting as well is that the European Commission is establishing a proposal, which is a new European restoration law that is part of the biodiversity strategy for 2030 and is part of the European Green Deal. And this is to establish legally binding targets that would be measurable and can be really monitored. So the objective is to ensure that degraded ecosystems such as coastal wetlands that you have in the Mediterranean will be restored and maintained by 2050, but with measurable results already by 2030. So of course, all of that is really to ensure that we halt biodiversity loss and contribute to climate change, climate mitigation and adaptation.
I feel awful to interrupt you, Anne-Sophie, because all you say is so interesting and valuable, but we're already over time. So do you think you can conclude quickly?
Yes, I can. And to reframe a bit that, that Raphael told you, policies currently lack information on evidence-based approach. And one of the approaches that we're going to present you today is actually to ask the question, to which extent are nature-based solutions cost-effective? And to do that, we need to have an integrated approach in understanding this gap. And it means recognizing the value of wetlands and their services. So it's done via ecosystem service assessment, but with also an understanding on how they make the value of solutions based on nature and the role of this nature-based solution. And this can really inform policy making.
Thanks a lot, Anne-Sophie. So let's move now to the second presentation on how to highlight the benefits of NBS by Selma.
Actually,
you start. You told me. That's true. Apologies.
No problem. So now we're gonna, you've just seen just before, like it's crucial to study the role of nature-based solution and value the potential benefits they actually bring to people. So ecosystem services is one of the routes to doing this, but we can see in the next slide what are ecosystem services and how do they really inform us on. So ecosystem services are all the benefits provided by nature to people at local, regional, and global scales, and they bring human survival and economic health and social well-being. They are produced as a result of ecosystem processes and functions such as nutrient cycling, and they flow to people in the form of benefits that support human well-being. So basically, they are, let's say, the link between ecological functions with the socioeconomic activities and people human well-being that really depend on those activities. So it can be a provision of food, regulation of climate, and less tangible services such as cultural ones. They can be classified in different categories. So the first one, for instance, provisioning services related to water provision or cultivation, harvested wild goods such as food, including medicinal resources as well. We do have regulation and maintenance services. So coastal wetlands, for instance, provide crucial benefits to many coastal communities by protecting them from flooding or storm surges. And the benefits from these ecosystem services can include prevention of loss of life, damages to housing, food sources, and also prevent saltwater intrusion, as we discussed just before. And we have also the cultural services, which relates to the connection that people have with nature. So this contact contributes to the spiritual experience, provide recreational enjoyment, for instance, but they are especially known to have a tremendous positive impact and long-term ones on the health and happiness of people. So some local communities have deep cultural connection to the area they live. And one example, for instance, in Tunisia, with one of our partner, AAO, are working with local communities in Gare Almera. Artisanal farmers are really culturally attached to nature because it really provides them with essential elements to traditionally grow their vegetables in polders. A slide to provide you with the global values of those ecosystem services. So some studies have been done to try to evaluate what would be their economic value. And Costanza et al. In 2014 provided this estimates of the global values of 125 trillion of US dollar per year globally. And it is over 1.5 times the size of the global gross domestic product. So it means that if we only focus on the GDP, we are actually underestimating the value that ecosystem services bring to people and biodiversity. So we really need to take a holistic approach when we assess those services. And Costanza also provided global values of the benefits of nature with an estimate between 1997 and 2011. And the inland and coastal wetlands were estimated to have ecosystem services reaching 50 trillion US dollar per year worldwide. And it is a conservative estimate. So it means that the estimates may even be much higher. So it approximately represents 53% of the current global GDP. And globally, we are also losing ecosystem services from land use conversion, and owing to this conversion, there is a reduction of this global value at a rate of 4.3 to 20.2 trillion US dollar per year. So it's particularly important to address, since our economies and societies really depend on those natural resources, but also for the poor and vulnerable communities, which are most of the time critically dependent on the provision of those services. Wanted to provide you the figure that is in the article of Seddon et al. From 2019. This figure is provided to show how to integrate nature-based solutions to climate change impacts into the social ecological vulnerability framework that has been formalized by the IPCC. But here I just wanted to show you this figure in the purpose only to show that the ecosystems have adaptive capacity, and this adaptive capacity is under potential impacts such as floods, and that can really alter the function and processes of this kind of ecosystem, and actually the flow of ecosystem services that they provide, and also the socio-economic benefits upon which society depend on. So the nature-based solutions are really at the interface between the ecosystem and the socio-economic system, and if they are implemented in a way that can increase the resilience of coastal ecosystem and the ecosystem services flow, they can actually empower society and communities in protecting, restoring, and managing ecosystems, along with sustainable socio-economic development that would help the overall social ecological system. So nature-based solution would reduce the vulnerability of the social ecological system as a whole, and this is really important to take into account for coastal wetlands in the Mediterranean basin, for instance. So my colleague Selma will present you now the concept of nature-based solution.
We cannot hear you, Selma.
Okay.
Okay.
That should be right. Yeah. So we can basically use this link between ecosystem services and NBS in order to have a glance on the diversity of NBS that exists. And as you can see on this graph, this classification depends on the link between ES and the level of engineering that is applied to ecosystems, and that is necessary for those actions. So this typology by Egermont and al. Is known and shared upon the scientific community and shows the diversity of actions that can fit in the frame of nature-based solutions. So for example, for the type 1, which is the use of a natural ecosystem, you will require a low level of engineering, but provide a great diversity of ecosystem services without focusing on one or two ecosystem services. That would be strategies like global planning strategies and sustainable strategies. The second type would be the managed or restored ecosystem, where you require a medium level of engineering and provide a smaller proportion of ecosystem services, but you focus more on the delivery of those ecosystem services. And that would be all actions of sustainable management that you can find in this category. And the third type of NBS is the creation of a new ecosystem, which requires a lot of engineering, usually with higher costs, and which is focused on one or two ecosystem services. And that would be all actions of environmental or ecological engineering. So to illustrate this, more concretely, for the type 1, you could have the use of natural ecosystem would be like with limiting the access to a certain natural area renowned for its fragile species or habitats. So it's, for example, the case in Camargue in the south of France, where human presence could have a negative impact on the natural or desired ecosystem functions. So the access would be limited or forbidden to protect this natural area. For the second type, which is the managed or restored ecosystem, you could have the sustainable use of fertilizer by limiting the use of mineral fertilizers, promoting the use of organic fertilizers or biostimulants, and by considering soil properties and biology. So this is, for example, implemented in the city of Strasbourg in France with a policy of zero pesticides. And finally, the third type of NBS, which is illustrated here, is the creation of new ecosystem with the ecological engineering and the use of plants and their interactions with the microorganisms to depollute some soils and area. And it's the case here on this example in New Caledonia with some techniques which are tested to treat nickel residues. So more, I can't, yes. If we focus on examples in the Mediterranean context, you can also see that NBS could be a combination of the three types of NBS to tackle a single challenge, which is here the example of the coastline protection challenge. Thanks to the NBS multifunctionality. And so the interest of those NBS is that they provide several ecosystem services. So for example, on the left, you can see that we can translate the individual actions that we can lead into NBS technical terms. So for the type 1, you have the sustainable and improved management of the dunes with the protection of those dunes by restricting access to the dunes, providing a high diversity of ecosystem services and restoring a large number of ecosystem services, as you can see on the right. For the type 2, you will have the rehabilitation of the dunes by maintaining vegetation to stabilize the sand, providing a smaller proportion of ecosystem services, and the type 3, which is the Posidonia herbiome restoration by replanting species. And it's more focused on engineering techniques, and so focusing on ecosystem services such as biodiversity regeneration, carbon sequestration, or may also fishing activities, for example. And so to illustrate a little bit this diversity of solutions that could be made to fit in the NBS framework, the IUCN took the subject in hand and created this normalized framework that you all know of. And so the purpose of this framework is to improve the stakeholders' confidence in nature-based solutions, but also ensure that actions are effective, upscalable, and also to measure their potential externalities. So they also put in place a self-assessment tool, which is composed of 8 criteria. And there is one criterion, which is the 4th criterion, which is focused on economic feasibility, which is of great interest for the subject we are treating today. And the purpose is to see if projects and to check if they fit in the norm and point out the levers that could be actions to improve the pertinence of the actions. So if you want more information, you can, of course, consult all the information on the IUCN website. And I give the hand to Anne-Sophie again.
I would say 3 minutes to go. I don't know where Anne-Sophie is.
Sorry, I have been muted, I think, along the way. So within this figure, I wanted to show you how understanding the benefits really can inform policy and management responses. So if we have some policy, so I'm just going to try to put it with a laser pointer. If we provide, the ecosystem services assessment and actually what kind of benefits nature-based solution can really bring, this can inform policy and management responses. And in a way, this can really lower down the pressure upon biodiversity, the state of biodiversity and ecosystem resilience can be improved. And as a chain, then increase and improvement of human well-being and increase of benefits of nature would again be improved. So all of that and all this chain really meant that informing on the value of nature-based solution, if implemented with sustainable resource use and restoration or even conservation management, can really consequently reduce the pressure upon biodiversity and improve the state of ecosystems. And of course, this process would need to be done from a local to a global approach. So indigenous people, local communities, NGOs, governments, private companies, and international organizations need to work in a coordinated way with nature now. In implementing nature-based solutions that secure sustainable future with healthy ecosystems that can provide many crucial services, sustainable development, but also, along with human well-being and biodiversity protection can be actually supported. And
thank you very much, Anne-Sophie and Selma. I think we've heard so much and so interesting information in the last hour. I think it's really, really interesting. I think you have planned a quick survey for the participants. And participants, please do not hesitate to write down the questions if you have some.
So I just sent some questions for you that should pop on your screen right now. So the first one, we want to know what what type of coastlands are you working to protect in conservation or policy? And the second question is, have you ever identified the ecosystem services provided by your site of interest? So please go ahead and answer to these little survey. I'm going to give everyone a few more seconds so then I can share the results of this poll. Awesome. So now I can share the results with you all.
And Sophie and Selma, do you have comments on this?
So we can see, and it's quite interesting that the lagoon and people working in ecosystems with delta and estuary water is quite important in the region, and salinas as well. And you know, so there's a division between natural ecosystems and more artificial ones. And I think that's really great to have all of that. And I can see that the marine ecosystem with Posidonia is also quite important, and they can actually store a lot of carbon. And I think that can be also you know, the beginning for a good discussion at the end of the webinar. And if we look at the identification of ecosystem services in your area, we can actually see that most of you already identified them. And I think it would be good to know within the discussion later on if you engage any stakeholders and how you actually identified them. That would be great, really good. Thank you very much for answering all these questions.
Okay, Selma, do you want to add something?
No, it's fine.
Okay, so let's move to the second session. We will continue with you and Sophie and Selma, and you're going to explain us briefly the methodology you use to run cost-benefit analysis and implement stakeholder engagement.
Yeah, thank you, Chantal. So as Chantal told you, it's really to give you an overview of the concept of cost-benefit analysis of nature-based solution, the details of the ecosystem services assessment and the methodology of cost-benefit analysis will be provided in the following webinar. So what is actually a cost-benefit analysis? When we talk about it, it is actually the ratio between the benefits, so the ecosystem services delivery, and the cost of implementation and management associated with providing or implementing different options, so such as nature-based solution or business as usual. And they really give and inform policy decision makers in providing them informed decisions, so they can gauge and they can grasp what is the best and most beneficial action to implement and put in place. So these analyses actually provide a useful, even if sometimes it's partial, but a good view on the net consequences of decision on human well-being. So the first step would be to do a valuation of ecosystem services, so the benefits, as we've seen. You can value these ecosystem services in monetary or non-monetary terms. Certain ecosystem services are more difficult to assess in monetary terms, and non-monetary values assessment actually are yet to be considered as a priority in the political agenda. And actually they address both environmental and social values of nature, and they are captured by differently by different group of people. So these services that cannot be valued in monetary terms should not be overlooked in the policy decision making. So before going into diving into your valuation of your ecosystem services, you need to ask yourself some questions if you want your project to really have an impact. So first one, and this is not an an exhaustive list. There's many other questions, but the main ones are here. So what is the objective of your project? What are you trying to do or to change? Are you trying to preserve? Are you trying to restore a site? What is your strategy to do it? The second one is, what are the decisions or policies that you really want to influence? Is there any relevant or management plan already in place, or something that will be implemented in the future by local or regional authorities? What is the level of decision making that you are actually targeting? Third one is the site context, so ecological, cultural, policy, economic, and political context. And you also need to define the site boundaries in which you want to do your evaluation of your ecosystem services, and who are the key stakeholders involved. And that also includes beneficiaries of the benefits that provide your ecosystems you're working on. So when you do your ecosystem services, you know that decision makers are likely to be concerned with social, ecological, and economic consequences of their decisions. So we need to assess ecosystem services and their relative values at a site of interest and compare these estimates to plausible alternative states. So for instance, as a business as usual coastal development is at the top right hand of the slide, or under a nature-based scenario, which is at the bottom right of the slide. And by doing the comparative valuation, so you're valuing the change in ecosystem services delivery, decision makers can really assess the net consequences of their decisions, and know which benefits may be lost or which ones may be gained, also what would be the impact on beneficiaries, and they can make informed decisions on which options is the most beneficial to people, but also to biodiversity. So it's really essential, crucial to also take into account beneficiaries when you do your comparative valuation, to understand how the changes in the delivery of ecosystem services will impact those users, depending on who they are, where they live, and how and when they use the services. There's a lot of factors that play a role in the distribution of the benefits, and it is really important to understand how those ecosystem services are distributed. And so social, political, and economic and ecological factors will play a role in those distribution at the local, national, and global level. And the future changes in the ecosystem service delivery within your different options will affect also differently diverse group of people. And I think that's very important to point out. So for instance, if we look at the table here, the carbon storage in a converted option of the land would have a negative impact to the beneficiary, not only at the local level, but at the global level. When we look at cultivated crops, for instance, that will have a more positive benefits for at the national level, because it would be sold at this scale. So it's really important to understand the distribution and who are the beneficiaries and where they live and how the ecosystem services are used. The outputs of your comparative valuation would be to synthesize your results. And now we do have evidence that shows that restoring or conserving natural habitats often provides greater net economic benefits than when converted. This has been shown in different studies, but this one is from Bradbury and al. From 2021. They synthesized results from 62 applications of toolkit of TESA, which is a toolkit for ecosystem services, site-based assessment. And this toolkit provides practical methods to users for assessing the difference of ecosystem services flows provided by a site under different states, as we've seen. The results here in the graph present the results of 24 sites for which the economic value of ecosystem services were given. The team compared their nature-focused state, which is nature conservation stage and ecological restoration stage, with alternative stage, with a modification, so human modified, such as conversion to agriculture, and pre-restoration alternative states, such as a coastal area claimed for agriculture. And by working out the annual net value of the range of goods and services for each site under each state, they showed that the restoring or conserving, so the nature focused state was globally more valuable in the different ecosystems. And that said, that for the nature-based solution, and if we take that into account, if we really want to understand how to finance solution based on nature and invest in them, we need to assess, of course, those economic value they bring. So the role of economic valuation is to measure explicitly any resulting gains and losses in human welfare from the changes in benefits. And the comparative valuation among nature-based solutions with other intervention can then be used to guide the necessary changes in coastal policies and management to actually control the threats and pressure we've seen at the beginning of the webinar.
And Sophia, we'll ask you to speed up a little bit, please.
Yeah, the outcomes of it is that you can provide impacts of those nature-based solutions on ecosystem service provision until the influence of at the local level on the policies, but also at the global level to inform human well-being. And Selma will present now the cost-benefit analysis of nature-based solution.
So now I will go into the basic principles of cost-benefits analysis. And I'm trying to pass here. So the purposes of cost-benefits analysis are to demonstrate the socioeconomic opportunity of NBS on the long term. Also to highlight in general the minimal management costs that balance the relative high investment costs. And finally, to set milestones and size the NBS intervention according to the initial challenges that are to be tackled and the needs that are to be satisfied. So basically, I will go through the steps of the cost benefits analysis in order to give you a better idea of how to perform this cost benefit analysis. I'm trying to pass the slide, but I can't, I think. Yeah. First, so you should look at the benefits of the nature-based solution by evaluating the material and immaterial implications of the NBS intervention compared to a situation where you don't implement any nature-based solution, which is the statu quo scenario. And for this, you will use the ecosystem services assessment approach, which is really useful and which we presented just before. So on the graph, you can see that the benefits of nature-based solutions correspond to the extra value of ecosystem services that is generated by a high protection scenario or NBS scenario. So you will need basically to monetarily assess the ecosystems of the site to perform this cost benefits analysis. Then you will have to evaluate the costs of your solutions, so for the NBS, but also for the alternative or statu quo scenario. And this could be the costs of implementation that exist only at the start of the project, such as land acquisition price or the price of planning works or preliminary studies, or all other costs that happen at the beginning of the project, or that could be also the cost of management or maintenance that can happen all along the project, such as monitoring studies, the management of the sites, or the monitoring of risks and nature quality, for example. So that would be the cost part. And finally, once you have the costs and benefits, you can compare those. And on the left, you can answer the question about benefits. So how much the site represents in terms of value, and on the right, how much the project costs. And you can do this for your nature-based solution scenario and for your statu quo scenario. And facing those numbers enables you to see if it is interesting or not to invest in a nature-based solution on the long term, regarding the benefits value that a nature-based solution can provide. So in most cases, of course, benefits that you could see on the left on the previous graph, in socioeconomic figures, they stand out from this analysis as they are more tangible for decision makers when translated into monetary terms, and hence those figures can stimulate investment in nature and stimulate finance in nature-based solutions. So just to illustrate quickly this methodology, we have at Vertigo Lab performed such a study. And so the first step was to make a site diagnosis. So it was in the south of France. And we had a site which was facing several threats and pressures. So such as water and air pollution, soil erosion, coastal erosion, but also marine submersion and flood. And we analyzed also the protection measures that were in place and the ones that were planned also. And for the NBS scenario, we considered the local coastal conservatory strategy, which planned to set operational measures to protect the ecosystems. So in this strategy.
I'm sorry, Selma, I'm going
Yes.
also to ask you to speed up a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, fine. So the second step was just to give you an idea about how we looked at the ecosystem services value provided by the current state of ecosystems. And we did it by doing research and interviews with local stakeholders. So we had this value. The third step was to look at the benefits of the scenarios, like so the first scenario was the scenario of high protection, which is considered as the NBS scenario. And the second scenario was the statu quo, which is the weakening protection scenario. We had a value for each of those scenarios. And then we calculated the difference between those two to get the benefits. And we saw that the benefits of the high protection scenario, so the NBS, was 5.5 million euros per year. And we also calculated the costs of both scenarios. And so we integrated what was available for us in the study, which is the planning and management costs, which were of 286 euros per hectare and per year. And we also considered the opportunity costs of urbanization, and we also took in consideration the wetlands value. So I can go more into details if you have more questions, but I will just pass to see that we compared to finish the costs and the benefits of those two planning scenarios, and we saw that the benefits value was much higher than the costs of implementing the nature-based solution. So that the benefit from the ecosystem protection provided by the NBS costs covered the cost engaged by the coastal conservatory strategy. So we proved that the NBS was more interesting on the socioeconomic point of view, as benefits were more important than the costs. And I will give you, I give Naima the control.
Thank you. So I have another little survey for all of you. So as the one before, normally you should have a little pop-up on your window. So I have two questions for you. The first one is, have you planned or are you planning on nature-based solution implementing phase? And the second one is, have you ever considered or would you consider assessing the cost benefit of a or multiple nature-based solution intervention? Meaning you will compare at least two option scenarios. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to go ahead and answer the survey, and then we can see the results. So thank you very much for all of your answers. Now we'll share the results.
Yeah, so
And
we
Sophie
can,
and Selma, comments maybe?
yeah, we can see that there's a great proportion of people with 80% almost who have planned or will plan an NBS implementing phase. So that's interesting for you to have the methodology that we could present you. And so we also see that the cost benefits analysis is of interest for you. So I hope that what we give you will be useful for you. And I think that the methodology, the proper methodology would be more detailed in the next webinars. So just to tell you that. I don't know if Anne-Sophie, you want to add something about that?
I think it's it's very good, and like you said, the detail of the methodology will be provided in the second webinar. And again, it'd be quite interesting to have you discuss a little bit. Maybe if some participant can provide and share their experience later on when we have the question answers and discussion part at the end.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to listen now to how stakeholders' engagement is key to succeed in implementing nature-based solutions, which I think is probably the hottest topic for all of us, and the most challenging. So ladies, again, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chantal. So yeah, we really wanted to point out this specific stakeholder engagement because it's kind of the key to the success of your project. So this engagement will involve participants in a collaborative process that will really guide the development and achievement of your project, which needs to have a defined scope. And these stakeholders can actually help you define this scope with a clear purpose and try to target goals and objectives of your study, but also to help you in the communication of your results. So those stakeholders involved, can be local, at regional, and also at the global scale. So it could be local people, local authorities, environmental partners such as other NGOs or even researchers that can help you through the project. And could also be people that are invested within the business sector, so the private sector, people within the government, and also investors. So investors could be, of course, a foundation that could give you funding to implement your nature-based solution or any other action of restoration. The government as well can provide you some funding, and the business sector really needs to also be engaged because they can have a tremendous role in helping hand in hand with NGOs on knowing on how to make those ecosystems more resilient because they are actually also dependent on nature. And one sector that is not really taken into account most of the time is the media. But the media can really play a role in disseminating your outputs and achievement of your project. They can have a real power to raise awareness among the public and also other institutions, but also the government. So they are also within the piece of the proposal. So investment into nature-based solution really need to triple by 2030 and increase fourfold by 2050 for the world to meet its climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation targets. So including all of the stakeholders is really crucial, and governance can really encourage notably private sector investment by designing policies to unlock the value of natural solutions. So they are all actors in the project, and they have they can have extent role, and some of them will have more or less interest within the project, and some would have more influence. So it means that they can actually affect the project outcomes of your project. So you can do a stakeholder mapping, and here in this figure, we can see that you will have some stakeholders with perhaps less interest within your project, and they won't have much influence or power to push through the outcomes of your project. So they're classified as a low priority, but they can give you still some essential information and objective ones on your project, just as identification of ecosystem services or how they may use benefits of nature. And then we do have those who would have more interest in the project, but who have less influence, and they are really important because they can give you really good feedback, and it's very important to collaborate with them. And that could be, they can help you doing some analysis for your ecosystem service assessment or your cost-benefit analysis. And it's really important to consult them and inform them all along your project. And then we do have those people who have less interest in your project, but have actually a big power and influence to push forward, for instance, the implementation of your nature-based solution, or maybe they may be able to provide you some funding to put the action in place. And in this case, well, they are actually a source of risks because they may not be that interested in your project. And this is actually where you will have to try to keep them satisfied and discuss with them, so that perhaps they would come to be moved to the top right of the graph, which are those with that can really affect positively your project, but also have a big interest in it. So you will have effective coalition to support success. It's a big relationship that we need to really strengthen with those stakeholders. So you will, all of the stakeholder mapping will help you know who are the key stakeholders and how they can actually help you. So the stakeholder engagement can help you build strong collaboration with partners, communities, businesses, and local to national authorities. That can also help you to include and have a wider contribution to local people. So it can empower them to advocate for their needs, to be integrated in policy decision-making. You can raise awareness and engage those local people as well. And the other key, and the third one, is through the stakeholder engagement. This is a process of also knowledge sharing, and that can also improve the capacity development within your own organization, but also the capacity development of other organizations that are working hand in hand with you. So we've seen already in conclusion that the valuation of ecosystem services can really demonstrate how conserving wetlands through nature-based solution can increase the benefits to people and the economic return in investment. The stakeholder engagement can really help you raise awareness among actors of the role of your coastal wetlands, can empower people that have sometimes less voice in the policy decision making. It can help you reprioritize the action to implement for your nature-based solution. And the ultimate goal as well, if you really want to implement your action of your nature-based solution, is to have the mean of financing nature-based solutions. So as raised at the COP26, capacities for many of the poorest Mediterranean countries to actually adapt to climate change and respond to drought or flooding and sea level rise really depend on the availability of funds to support adaptation measures. So financing nature-based solution means financing available solutions that will be cost effective at the long term and generate of course socioeconomic opportunities. And that should be normally and hopefully the success of your project. And I think that's urgently required in the Mediterranean and within the Mediterranean stakeholders, and that includes also the government, also the business sector, to join really forces and implement those innovative solutions based on nature to actually reverse the trends of the Mediterranean crisis. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie. I think there's also a growing trend in this direction. So hopefully things are going to improve in that direction in the coming years. So we'll take now some questions for those of you who are willing to ask a few more details. So maybe you want to share an experience. You can raise your hand or you can write questions in the chat. I don't see questions in the chat, so I guess we will have people asking directly.
If people want to take the stage by talking, no problem. If you want to share your experience, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, so I'm happy to open with a question. I always have a lot. What would you say in your experience has been the most challenging aspect? Because I mean, we see it requires a lot of skills that range from being able to run an economic analysis to understand how to convince a stakeholder, and this requires very, very different skills. So how would you recommend to work? I mean, is it like, maybe it sounds a little bit naive, but is it like one person doing it? Do you need a team? How have you been managing all this, and what has been your biggest challenge so far in running these approaches?
Should I start, or maybe yeah? Well, at least and on the way that we've been working with partners, we are partnering with Vertigo Lab, BirdLife International, and other partners in the Mediterranean basin to actually do some cost-benefit analysis for a nature-based solution. And the main point is, of course, people have different expertise, and that's quite important. Especially the stakeholder engagement at the beginning, to really see who can really actually help you, where you have some gaps in terms of skills, to help you go and do your cost-benefit analysis. I think that the first stage is really to collaborate. Also, look at your key stakeholders, who can do what and how can they help you. And when you do have, the identification of ecosystem services, it's also to have discussions with local communities. Local communities have a tremendous environmental knowledge in the field, so they can really help you through also on already identifying your ecosystem services. When we go to the expertise of doing the cost-benefit analysis, well, hopefully within the next webinar, you will all be prepared to go on with doing it and knowing it. It's also to find ways and tools with consistent approaches that provide non-specialists on how to go and how to do those cost-benefit analysis. And this is what we are trying actually to do in collaboration with Vertigo Lab, to provide some guidelines to non-specialists. There are, some tools out there already that provide non-specialists on how to go about ecosystem services assessment. So the toolkit of TESA, for instance, the toolkit for ecosystem service site-based assessment, and I'm happy to put the link on the chat, really enable people to, with practical methods that are easy to use, at least less complex to do the ecosystem service assessment. Not obliged to do a monetary value. Sometimes, just a qualitative assessment is already descriptively enough to provide some answer on how important these services are used by different beneficiaries. And I think globally, these are the three dimensions that really need to be taken into account. Maybe Selma have another additional view on it, on her experience.
In the meantime, the link is now in the chat for those of you who are interested by knowing more about Tessa.
Yeah, I would say that one of the most difficult part is the access to data. So it's linked to what you were saying about the stakeholders, because you have to see who has the data and identify the pertinent stakeholders and people who have the knowledge to help you perform the economic valuation. So I think that's the greatest break that, but we can do also without data. I mean, we can use approximates to do estimations. So yeah, there is a methodology to work on this difficulty.
Okay, thank you. Anyone? That's your chance. Do you want to ask questions or share an experience, or maybe one challenge you have, or a difficulty, or a good news?
I can give an example from the MAVA project. If there's no one who wants to take the stage, I know there's some participants here and partners that are here that really had challenges and could actually discuss them. And like I said, Selma, often the challenges that the partners find is, time to have the meetings with stakeholders. Also, nowadays with the COVID situation, did not really help to do these stakeholder engagements. It's an even additional challenge, and also the data. Sometimes it's a long wait for having the data. And for instance, in 2018 to 2020, we did have an assessment of ecosystem services in Sardinia with our partner METSI, and Vania will present later on the ecosystem services assessment made in Sena Arubia. And the challenge was to actually obtain some robust and accurate data sometimes, because it's sometimes, for example, water quality was actually assessed and not, the sample size. So the number of time that the water quality was assessed wasn't really done in a consistent way. In this case, as said, Selma, you need to find ways and alternatives to find other ways to do it, either by finding other organizations that are actually working also on this kind of evaluation of ecosystem services, or go in the field by yourself. But of course, it is a trade-off between time, energy, and also funding for the partners.
Okay, I think it's interesting, this trend that we need to have more and more scientists to step out of the silo, if I may say, and go and talk to people. I think this is going to be an increasing challenge. I see a question appearing. How can you convince decision makers of the importance of nature-based solutions? Have specific communication strategies been established to promote nature-based solution?
Should I take, or Selma, do you want to take the?
I just have maybe an element in mind. which is that usually the socioeconomic impacts of nature-based solutions are a very convincing argument for decision makers. So that communicating the results in socioeconomic and terms and monetary values should be systematic to enhance decisions. And I think, Anne-Sophie, you agree with this.
Yeah, and I think now, you know, as presented at the beginning of the agenda, with the new global biodiversity framework and all the new restoration law from the European Commission, you know, the member states really need to commit to those targets. So now they really have to you know, find and look at information and local information. You know, there was like some conferences with EPES, and a lot of things have been said that actually, you know, they're kind of the bridge with the governments. And I think that's what we really need, is find some, you know, local to global approaches and find organizations that can help really provide those information that you know, we have from different sites. And for instance, join forces in the Mediterranean to have, for instance, you know, there's a Mediterranean alliance that has been created, and those people are working in partnership together to, you know, gather information on restoration, best practices, looking at information on ecosystem services. And I think now we really need to gather those information together, but also find coordinators that could, you know, put the bridge and inform governments, but also engage the business sector into the discussion and to do that. And specific communication strategies to promote nature-based solution. I think that, you know, the COPs have been a bit talking about that. I know that there's a nature-based solution policy tracker that has been launched by Nature for Climate and Metabolic at the COP26. So it's kind of it uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually identify legislation and investment plans for nature-based solution and to assess their effectiveness. You know, it's kind of designed to serve the world's largest global database of public policies to support nature and helping governments and investors to increase ambition and awareness of nature's potential to actually tackle the climate emergency. I don't have the details on how it is working. I'm you know, more than happy to maybe share the link to this. But what I can also say is that the communication strategy, I think it's quite important. It's something that we probably present in the second webinar as well, is how you need to communicate your data. And this is different with the target of your audience. So depending on who you are actually targeting, the communication will be different. And I think that's quite important to provide.
Yeah, I think less and less there is an already made solution or a package. As we were saying, it's more about getting into a mindset to talk to people.
Yeah.
We're going to need to break. I would suggest we break for 5 minutes. So we can start again at, I'm sorry, it's going to be 3:52 sharp. So 3:52 in 5 minutes, we're all back here. I think it's important that you're all back to listen to more concrete cases. And actually, if you can leave your mic on mute and maybe you turn off your camera, it's probably easier for all of you to reconnect rather than turning off and coming back. So 5 minutes, for everyone to walk a little bit, get a bit of fresh air, and we are back with more stories from the ground. Thanks. So welcome back, everyone. I hope we haven't lost too many people during the break. So we are going now from, I wanted to say from theory, but we had actually quite a concrete approach and lots of examples also in the first part, let's say, of this afternoon, but we'll go even more to the ground with the presentation of a project taking place in Sardinia and another one in Spain. Both are part of the integrated management for the conservation of Mediterranean wetlands, nature-based solutions and sustainable economic practices project, which is a project funded by the MAVA Foundation, and they aim to reduce the impact on critical Mediterranean wetlands, such as water abstraction and coastal development. So I suggest we listen to the two testimonials, and then we will take questions. We're going to start with the case of Sardinia in Italy, and I'm calling now Vania Satsu. Vania is an environmental economist. She has a political and science and statistics background. So she's worked for universities and research centers on consumer preferences for green technologies and practices. She's also worked on monetary valuation of ecosystem services, on social capital. And this is not, this doesn't stop here. Vania is a founder and vice president of the METSI Foundation, where she's in charge of natural capital and ecosystem services assessment and activities addressed to improve sustainability in the private sector. Last but not the least, she's the technical coordinator of the Maristanis project that aims at creating a new integrated shared governance model for the 6 Ramsar sites that are found in the area of Oristano, that's the western coast of Sardinia. And last point about Vania, she's an environmental advisor to, and she supports companies and public administrations in the adoption of the sustainability indicators, including the UN SDGs 2030. So Vania, the floor is yours. I think you are you're traveling today. I think where are you?
I'm here.
Ah, great.
Yes.
I couldn't see you.
Yes. I'm here. Thank you.
What a curriculum you have, Vania. Really, yes. That's impressive.
I hope that you can see my presentation. Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes, as told you by Chantal, METSI is based in Sardinia and is working on the Maristanis project that includes 6 Ramsar sites in the western coast of Sardinia. Concerning the ecosystem services analysis, we focus in the first phase only on in one of these lagoons and ponds, and especially on the lagoon of Senarrubia. This is a peculiar site because it's the remaining part of a larger pond that was reclaimed 100 years ago and was created an agricultural area that is currently mainly under the nitrate directive due to the large amount of manure and slurries due to the cattle breeding that is in the area, and especially in southern part of the Senarrubia lagoon. All the other ecosystem services like the pine wood that is between the dunes and the lagoon is artificial ecosystem. So it's a very fragile area, but it's also very important for the biodiversity. So this area is not only a Ramsar site, but also an important bird area as it is inserted in the Natura 2000 network. The area is very important also from an economic point of view because around inside of the lagoon, several economic activities was carried out, and especially traditional fishing and aquaculture activities and growing crops and vegetables, the cattle breeding related to the dairy sector, but also to meat production. It's also a place where local international tourists love to spend their time, especially during summer months. And is a really important cultural heritage site, not only for people in Arborea, but also for all the Sardinian people. Several threats created issues in this area. Water abstraction due to agriculture, but also tourism sector, salt intrusion due to sea level rise, and also water abstraction from people in the area. The excess of nitrates that, as I told before, created several problems in this part of the Sardinia. And the climate change. This area is severely affected by floods, as Anne-Sophie told before, and extreme rainfalls. In some cases, also suffering from coastal floods. And on the other side, drought is also one of the other problems that periodically affect the Senarrubia site. Coastal erosion of the beach is partly due to the effect of climate change, partly due to the infrastructure that was built in the past year to try to protect the moat from to the sea of the lagoon. Then lack of governance. That is one of the big issues of this area, but also of the other areas in the Maristanis project. Our objective was to strengthen the protected area management. As I told you before, this is a Natura 2000 site with a new shared governance model through a private-public involvement. I will explain later what we mean about shared governance. We aim also to restore riparian areas, to create new areas to protect the species and to recreate habitats, remove invasive and alien species, and in this area is especially the blue crab, control the access to the lagoon and avoid that people could access the lagoon and also the dunes by cars, and the reduction of chemicals in agriculture to improve water quality and also soil quality. What means this? Means to introduce in the area more effective regulations, also to control access and also to reduce the chemicals in agriculture, but also to raise the awareness of fishing, farmers and tourist operators about their role of guardians of the lagoon, because they are the people that are living day by day in the lagoon, so they are the power to act to preserve the lagoon and also to provide early warnings on new problems that are arriving in the lagoons, as happened, for example, for the arrival of blue crabs in the lagoon. But also to provide evidence that we can have a new forms of economic earnings from natural restoration and preservation. This is the current state of Senarrubia. I told you before, this is the protected areas, is under Natura 2000, and this is the area with regulation concerning the use of nitrates in agriculture. These are some pictures that represent the economic activities, but also the ecosystems. On the other side, we have the alternative state that will use in the first phase to evaluate ecosystem services with the current protected area with the most effective regulation and the future buffer area with large regulation of economic activities, but also tourism, especially to avoid that touristic activities could affect nested activities for bird life. This is some example of the restoration activities that I will explain better later. The ecosystem services assessed in the first phase are cultivated goods, harvested goods that refer to the fishing and aquaculture that are traditional practices, but are addressed to the regional market, so are not only for self-consumption. The nature-based creation and tourism, because a camping is inside the Ramsar site, and the cultural services as a connection to the nature. The results of our assessment demonstrate that all the sectors could have net benefits from a more water restoration and a more sustainable management of the area. Farming activities, for example, will benefit by 3% more from adopting sustainable practices instead to use chemicals. And this is a big result for us, because sometimes it's thought that sustainability could decrease the earnings of agricultural companies, but in that case, we demonstrate that at least there is no decrease, but there are a small increase. There is a 25% increase in the recreational activities and tourism, and 82% increase in fishing activities due to the improving water quality, so the reduction of fish loss due to low water quality related to the decrease of chemicals in agriculture, but also due to the practices introduced to regulate blue crabs into the lagoon, so to keep these invasive species under control, and also to the possibility to develop alternative activities related to tourism due to a better quality of water and riparian areas in the lagoon. So what is demonstrated was that large benefit could achieve to the lagoon of Senarubia with improving environmental quality. Of course, this scenario was analyzed without taking into account the interaction with the climate change. That will be what we do in the second phase, as briefly told before, after. Concerning the socio-cultural values, we demonstrate that local people have a strong attachment to the area, and they found that preserve and improve environmental quality of Senarubia is important, especially for the health and for the leisure cultural ecosystem services provided by the Lagoon of Senarubia. The willingness to pay that we estimate indicate the resident will support strong measures to preserve the cultural values provided by the wetlands. This result was important because it was used also to draft the action plan of the Maristanis Coastal Wetland Contract, which is a voluntary agreement introduced by the Italian national legislation to promote a shared governance of rivers, lakes, and wetlands. And this is the first new governance model that we introduce in this area. And this is a new model because the coastal contract will create an instrument that let public and private sector to cooperate to better manage environmental areas, and especially those related to water ecosystems. The result was also useful to demonstrate the benefit from investing in sustainable innovation in farming and fishing sectors. And it was also a good guidance for addressing EU funds or new policies to be supported through EU funds. It was also useful for the new regional government sustainability plan, also for the update of other plans, because this result was also used for the Coastal Wetland Contract that is under the coordination of the regional government. And this kind of result could be useful for new environmental policies that should be introduced into the regional activities. For example, the resilience and recovery plans and funding that are now under planning. In the second phase, we will focus more on the climate change effect in this area. If the Senarubia Lagoon is mainly affected from inland flood, as Anne-Sophie told before, the other site that we decided to introduce in this analysis is most affected by coastal floods. The Corusitiri and Coromandel site is in the same municipality of Senarubia, but is more coastal lagoon, because is only a small beach could preserve the area, and is a peculiar site because in the Ramsar site is also including this marine part that is characterized by Posidonia meadows. So we decided to enlarge also the site of Senarubia, including Posidonia meadow part, in order to understand how Posidonia could act as nature-based solution to avoid damages created by climate change. Concerning the benefit of the area are more or less the same, but in this part of the Corusitiri is settled one of the most important aquaculture company in Italy, and also a seafood canning and transformation activities is located in the area. The two sites, Corusitiri and Senarubia, are also important because they belong to the regional government, but they was assigned to local fishermen cooperatives that are also in charge of hydraulic maintenance, while all the other maintenance activities are in charge of the local municipalities. So the objectives for this second phase was to strengthen the connection between the Maristanis Coastal Wetland Contract and regional national plans for climate change mitigation and adaptation, to analyze the national disaster risk reduction for both coastal floods and coastal erosion, improving management practices, and especially the farming and fishing management practices referring the ponds, and increase the benefit that a better management could provide for people, preserving of course the local values, so all the cultural benefit that are provided by the two lagoons. The cost-benefit analysis will be performed using three scenarios: the nature-based scenario, the business as usual with the climate change, and also the standard mitigation measure with the climate change. So comparing what will happen in the future, take into account the climate change conditions, if we invest in nature-based scenarios, nature-based solutions, sorry, business as usual, and or we invest in standard mitigation measures. What are our nature-based solutions? To restoring the dunes that are in this area in order to provide the first barriers to the coastal climate change negative consequences, to restore the pine wood in this area and also in this area, to restore Posidonia. Using the results of other projects that we are conducting in other areas of the Oristano Gulf and Sardinia, we could also try to understand how to restore the Posidonia meadow could be important to avoid the coastal erosion and coastal floods.
Sorry to speed you up,
yes,
Vanya.
It's
really frustrating because it's so interesting, everything, and it's like, okay.
Yes, and Yes, and also to take into account, of course, sustainable agricultural practices and the interaction with the climate change. The ecosystem services that will assess are coastal erosion control, the coastal floods related to sea level rise that as you can see in this picture, could severely affect this area in 2100. The global climate regulation, so how to restore this ecosystem, could provide a way to stock CO2 emissions and water quality that is affected by climate change and economic activities. Finished.
Okay, thank you very much, Vanya. So let's move now to the second presentation with Jesus Pinilla. Jesus is an environmental biologist, and he's been working for SEO BirdLife, which is the BirdLife partner in Spain for the last 25 years. He is now coordinating projects from bird bringing and census to conservation of sites and species. He also represents his organization in different regional, Andalusian in his case, boarding committees such as flora and fauna, biodiversity, and rural development. So Jesus, I don't know if you are here.
Yes, I am.
Yes, good. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chantal. Good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much for being there, because you are still there, aren't you?
Yes, we still have above 20 people.
Okay. Well, let me share with you a small picture of what we've been doing within this project of integrated management for the conservation of Mediterranean wetlands. And let's start presenting the site, which is the natural park of Bahía de Cádiz, which is located, as you can see, in southern Spain, near the Strait of Gibraltar. And within this site, we've got two main environments: the salt marshes, which comprises the most of the site, but we've got also an interesting coastal stretch depicted here in this super fashion pink color in the left hand side of the picture. Most of these salt marshes have been transformed into salinas, this kind of structures that you can see here in the picture. It all started around the Roman times. I can't remember the details because I was still a baby back then, but since then it has the area, these type of structures and management have produced many benefits, both to people, salt production being the main, but also others, as you can see here in the list, and also to biodiversity. The management of the water levels that is needed for these productions, salt or fishes, is very important for feeding and nesting migratory birds. And the conservation of this habitat, the salinas, was actually the basis for the declaration of the site as a natural park back in the 1990s. However, important and significant changes in the markets of the salt and the fishes have led to the abandonment of many of these salinas. At present, around 75% of them are abandoned, and this represents an important loss of biodiversity. There are other threats in the area, as you can see here in the list, like coastal erosion, climate change, or human pressure that are also shared with other coastal wetlands. So we've set our objectives within the project, quite ambitious, I know, but it's important to try to find solutions to the consequences of the abandonment of these salinas, consequences to people and birds. It's important also to improve the marshland management in order to reduce the natural disaster risk in the area. And all this can only be achieved through and with the natural park managers. So for this, we are performing a cost-benefit analysis, as we've seen before today, comparing business as usual scenario, things as they are now and as we can foresee them to evolve in the next few decades, against an NBS scenario. For this, we have selected these ecosystem services to be assessed: erosion control, flood protection, and global climate regulation, and have designed or determined these future alternative scenario with nature-based solutions such as marshland restoration, salt ponds sustainable management, and also dune protection and restoration. The details on the procedures and the results of this assessment will be presented in the forthcoming webinars. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jesus. So as said, we're going to take questions now. Anyone? I don't know if we have any question in the chat. Naima, maybe you can help me check. Otherwise, people just step in, take the floor. You just need to unmute your mic and camera, I guess. So whether you have questions to Vanya and or Jesus, feel free to let us know.
I will just share with you the links presenting the reports of the examples I have shared in my presentation. I will just share it in the chat.
Okay,
So
and I think it will also be good in the email follow-up to also add this information.
Yes, sure.
Definitely. Okay. Okay, questions? Is it overall too difficult or too challenging or easy and clear, but you don't know where to start from? I think it would be interesting also to hear you participants on how you feel about the whole presentation. It's the first webinar, so we can still adapt for the coming ones. No one wants to give comments or ask questions. I will ask one as usual. I asked Anne-Sophie about the challenges in the previous sessions. I would like to hear you, Vanya and Jesus, also tell us what were your positive surprises or positive results or something that came unexpectedly as a very good news for you in the work. because I mean, it's a challenging process, definitely, but I'm pretty sure that there are days when you feel like hope is here and things can really make a difference. Things you're doing, of course, can make a difference. Who wants to answer that?
Maybe I can also try to answer one of the two questions that I read in the chat. Yes, of course, is especially for us that are Sardinian people working in Sardinia is quite important to produce studies that could be transformed in something concrete to improve environmental quality, but also the work quality and lives quality for the local people. In our case, of course, a better management of the wetland areas, not only the two that I presented today, could create new jobs. I show something about the tourism sector, and the tourism in wetlands is totally underdeveloped in especially in Sardinia and in Italy. While we when we spoke with tourists, especially tourists coming from abroad and from other Italian regions, they will be really interested in having more opportunities to better know the wetlands, and especially to have the opportunity to have experiences related to the bird watching, for example, or also activities related to the fishing activities. Could the fish something in the acting as a fisherman, so working in a traditional way could be a really interesting experience from tourists that generally arrive in Sardinia only to stay lying the beaches. So
well, it's hard not to. They're beautiful. The sea is amazing.
Yeah. So of course, I'm pretty sure that with a good, with a better and also integrated managerial system, we could improve activities. Of course, better managerial tools means to put together all the actors in the territory, so regional government, municipalities, but also the private sector that is operating in the area.
Okay, Jesus?
Yes, for me, as I have told, the area was declared as a natural park in order to preserve a certain specific habitat, which are the salinas, which are, as I've already told you, most of them abandoned, and this is a problem, and this is the main threat that the park managers are facing. And the only solution to that for the last 20 or 30 years has been to recover, to rebuild those salinas that have been lost. In a meeting that we did with different stakeholders, we put on the table another option, which is the marshland restoration, natural marshland restoration, which hasn't been selected or included within the management of the site to restore, to go back to the natural marsh. It was very well received for these managers and the boarding committee of the natural park as a solution, as a different scenario, and it was quite rewarding for us to have that after this meeting.
Thank you. Interesting. I know that, Vanya, you partially answered to the questions we have in the list. So we have two. We have how to evaluate efficient management of wetlands. Are there specific tools? Well, I guess they're all connected to what you are presenting today. And then, is it a good managerial system to generate jobs for rural communities? I also think that Vanya was answering to this, but please, Tufik and Sana, if you feel we haven't given you a complete answer, just let us know and we're happy to build on this.
No, thank you so much. The answer was clear enough.
Okay, thank you. Sana, may I ask you what you're working on while you're there?
Yes, first I'm from Lebanon. I teach at the Lebanese University. And I manage an NGO called the Green Community. So we have a program based in to manage a rural area. It's a protected site. We call it the Valley of Small Lambs. We're trying to, it's not a wetland, but it is a protected site, and we are trying to connect the communities to this protected site and create, maybe the situation in Lebanon now is very difficult. So we are trying to create jobs, to generate things, to make people feel that nature environment, if they are good to it, it can generate income. So that's what you are trying to figure out, and you're trying to see the funding and things like this.
How is it going?
Not good, not bad. We got a small fund now for this, but I think women and young people are helping as they are. So start something that might help them. Let's say maybe artisanal product, things that they can do from there, tracking, a little bit of guidance, and trying to put some laws with the regulations with the Ministry of Environment here in the country.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, you're probably in one of the most challenging places in the Mediterranean
Exactly.
lately.
Yeah. We dropped from good country to a catastrophe, but this is life. We have to, yeah.
Yes, but as you were saying, there are communities, the youngs, the women, and we need to rely on this. And I hope this webinar has brought you answers. And in any case, we're going to give you the contacts of all our speakers, so that if you have any question, you can keep going. One more question, and then I think we're going to have to come to the conclusions. Anyone wants to ask another question? Okay, in the meantime, Anne-Sophie has put another link. I suggest that all the links we've put at some point will be also put in the follow-up mail. Okay, so I hear or see no question, unless someone is typing, but I don't think so. Okay, so many thanks to all for the presentations, the questions. To me, I mean, time was literally flying for the 3 hours. And I hope that the content has been useful for everyone. So before we listen to Anne-Sophie and Selma for the closing remarks, I again would like to remind that the webinar, there is a question. Yes, the presentations are going to be shared, Sana, do not worry. So this webinar, I was saying, is the first of a series of 3, and you will receive more emails in the coming weeks and months about them. But you can already mark them down in your calendar. I think the dates are going to appear somewhere on the screen at some point. These webinars actually are part of a wider initiative, which is called Wetland-Based Solutions. You can see the logo on top left, or now on top, on bottom right on this screen. And this project is gathering more than 30 partners, including those who are presenting today, in 10 Mediterranean countries around the issues of Mediterranean coastal wetlands. To know more about the project, you can visit the website. It's still in progress, but you still can find quite important and interesting information for now. Basically, the initiative is working towards the reduction of water abstraction and coastal development through the restoration of coastal wetlands, which, as we've been saying, are among the best habitats to tackle the biodiversity and climate crisis that we are facing in the region. And we work at different levels, and these levels include technical support, research, implementation of good practices on the ground, policy, and communication. So we are very interested as a community also to not only reach out to you, but to hear from you and to get your requests if you have any. So please do not hesitate. I know that everyone who was presenting today is also quite happy to be supporting your initiatives or listening to your experiences. So I will pass the floor to Anne-Sophie and Selma for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Chantal. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
And just as Chantal said, just the next webinars, so you know it's a series of 3 webinars for the one of today, and we do have the second one the 22nd of February, and then the third one on the 3rd of May. So please register to it. We will again send emails with the registration link, and also some links and articles that have been put in the chat today. And as a closing remark, you can also, if you want, do not hesitate to send us questions, or you know, if you want to start the discussion on sharing your experience and how we can also adapt the second webinar for you, because you know I think this is quite important that we try to share experience between all the different organizations and know what are actually your needs as well, so you can also implement your projects in your region. So do not hesitate to send us emails, and I think both Selma and I are you know, very thankful to everyone for the webinar. Thank you very much for the participants, and thank you to the MAVA Foundation that has helped us a lot to be able to work in partnership with all these people, and also to fund this webinar today. Maybe Selma, if you want to add anything, more than happy to give you the floor.
I go along with you, but I thank you a lot for attending this webinar, and I think we'll have the chance to go more into the details of the methodology, to go under how to perform this methodology now that we have shown why it's really important. So thank you for attending today.
Thank you. So I would say see you next year at this point. And again, in the meantime, if you want to connect with our speakers, feel free to do so. Thanks again, and see you soon then. Bye-bye.